Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see so many of you registered and joining us today for our EI statewide forum. I am Erica Wallace, the Children and Families Advisor here at OACB, and I'll be facilitating today's forum. First, we'll discuss CPDUs and then review today's agenda. If you registered for CPDUs, you should receive an email following today's forum, and it will prompt you to go to Member Connect to retrieve those. I also will put a short guide of instructions in the chat for you all. As far as the schedule for the day, we have Adam Herman, CEO of OACB, giving us an introduction. And then we will have Diane Fox providing an introduction from DODD. And then she will introduce Director Houck, who provided a welcome video for you all today. Our first session will be EI rule updates with Katrina Bush and Henry Matthews. Our second session will be navigating the autism diagnosis process and transition from EI with Amy Gilman and Sylvia Call. Our third session will be understanding intergenerational communication with Bill Cox. And our final session today will be tech intentional practices with Emily Churkin. With that being said, I will hand it over to Adam Herman.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. It's incredible the turnout we have, as always, for our virtual early intervention forum. Actually, right now, looking at the screen, we have more than 400 of you on with us. We know as professionals, family members, people who care about early intervention in our system. So I just want to say how much OACB appreciates how much time you spend with us and your dedication to professional development, continuing professional education, getting better at your jobs, which are among the most important jobs we have here in Ohio's DD system. We appreciate that you choose to spend your limited time available because we know you're also very busy with us at OACB. I can't, again, underscore how important all the work that the professionals on this call is to our field, to the families that we serve in our system. You're often the first experience that families will have with county boards, and that's a very important first impression to make. Fortunately, in Ohio, we are very lucky to have such a talented group of people who are making that first impression, because early intervention services across the state are second to none, in our opinion. So we appreciate all the work that you do, and we appreciate the time that families spend. We also know you have a very limited time in your lives, and the fact that you, some of you are joining us here today is incredible, and we appreciate you as well. I also want to give gratitude to two people who have been with us for a very long time and are starting the next chapter of their lives and their careers in some instances. Susan Jones and Beth Poppich have been with OACB for more than a decade. And earlier this year, they started to transition into that next phase. We're not going to call it retirement, because I don't think that either Susan or Beth will ever stop working or ever stop supporting the early intervention and children's services folks in our state. They are just so passionate, and we have appreciated having that passion on our team at OACB for more than a decade, and for many decades, I won't say how many, but for many decades in Ohio's DD system. They were even helping create this event here today. Very much appreciate all the time and dedication they've given to the DD field, to OACB, to this profession, and to the families that they have interacted with over the years. So I would be remiss if I did not share that gratitude with all of you who are on this call today. I also want to, I know you all know her. She was just on screen, but also want to make sure that we give gratitude to Erica Wallace, who's joined us from the Scioto County Board of DD on the OACB team in Susan and Beth's full-time replacement. No one can truly replace them, but she is doing a bang-up job so far, trying to. And I know that she's very excited about the events that we have, or the content that we have planned here today. I hope that Erica will soon get a chance to meet all of you in person. If you haven't met with her already, she's going to be at our annual convention, which is coming up on November 29th, 30th, and December 1st. So we hope to see many of you there. And I know that she's excited to get out and start going to county boards across the state. So you may even see her in your neck of the woods soon. So I know you all didn't sign on here to hear me talk about really anything, so I'm not going to continue on. I just want to say again, thank you all for being here. OACB appreciates you. Our field appreciates you. Your work is so important, and we appreciate just how much time you spend getting better at your job so that you can provide better services to the kids and families in our system. So thanks again, and I can't wait to hear more about what's going on today. Erica?
Thank you, Adam. We really appreciate your introduction this morning. We will move on to Diane Fox.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fall EI Forum. And I am very, very pleased that over 400 of you are joining us today. And I can only echo what Adam just shared, how much I and the department appreciates the work that you do every day on behalf of the families that you support. And that, the promise is that we will continue to support provide EI providers as we transition to the new agency and continue to invest in professional development opportunities. You are in for a treat this morning. First of all, Director Howe could not be with us today. She is actually on vacation, I believe. And so, but she did record a message to you. So I think we'll hear that now. And then following the director's message, I would like to introduce Katrina Bush, project manager at the department, who is coordinating the rule revisions, and Henry Matthews, who is one of our early intervention program consultants, who is also part of the rule review work group. So let's hear a few words from Director Houck. Have a great forum.
Hi, I'm Kim Hauk, Director of the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. I appreciate you taking the time to participate in today's Early Intervention Forum. This is an important opportunity to learn about updates in the field and best practices to provide the best services to our youngest and their families. As I'm sure you have heard, in the state budget signed in July, Governor DeWine created a new state agency to streamline services and programs for Ohio's children and families. I'm excited that Governor DeWine has chosen Kara Wente to lead the Ohio Department of Children and Youth. Kara has years of leadership experience and a reputation of putting kids first. Professionals from the Departments of Developmental Disabilities, Education, Health, Job and Family Services, and Mental Health and Addiction Services will make up the new agency, and programs such as early intervention will transfer to the department. The department will place children at the core of its mission to promote positive, lifelong outcomes for all of Ohio's youth. Their goal is to effectively serve children earlier and in their homes, measure outcomes of programs, reduce duplicative program regulations and requirements from across state government, streamline applications and eligibility, and increase overall administrative efficiency. A lot of the heart and soul of early intervention is participating in this forum, and I'm sure you have questions about the new agency. I want to assure you that stakeholder engagement remains a priority, and training and technical assistance will continue to be provided throughout the transition. Members of the DODD team will start to transfer to the new department, and our lines of communication are open and strong. I look forward to this new partnership and ensuring Ohio's children and their families are receiving the services and resources they need to succeed. Thank you again for all you do, and I hope you enjoy the forum.
Erica, you are on mute.
Sorry, let's try that again. We will begin our first session today with Katrina Bush and Henry Matthews. Sorry about that. With EI rule updates.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you to all the participants today. I'm Katrina. I'm with the department. I know some of you, but with such a great turnout, I know I don't know many of you. Because we just have a short period of time today, I wanted to let you know our focus for today is the rule update, but more than going over every possible change to the rule, we will be focusing largely on giving you some highlights and helping you understand the rule rewrite process and your future opportunities to provide feedback. So we really want feedback to the rules and the forms from a very, very diverse, from every single one of you. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been doing so far to solicit feedback. So because of the size of the group, there won't be an opportunity really for a lot of conversation at this stage, although we do hope to have that later opportunities for that. So please put any questions you have in the chat, and we will try to get to them and or respond to them later. We can work with OACB to get those questions out, some questions and answers back out to the field. You can always also email me or Henry directly, and our email, we have that address at the end of the slides. So please do provide your questions in the chat. We're going to go through the material pretty quickly and try to leave at least 15 minutes to answer as many of those questions as we can. So today we are focusing on the overview of the rule development and the feedback comment process and what the most significant changes. So the next slide. So as you probably already know, we have 5 rules. The department, they're at DODD, but they're early intervention rules that cover all of the early intervention system, whether people work at the county board or not. So all rules in Ohio must be reviewed and refiled every 5 years. And 4 of our EI rules are due. So the developmental specialist certification rule is not up yet for review, but the other 4 are. And they are procedural safeguards, system of payment, the eligibility and services rule, and the EI service coordinator and service coordinator supervisor credential rules. So all of those rule revisions have to be in effect no later than July 1st. It is our policy to begin that process of rule review early enough to have time to gather stakeholder feedback and to develop training and materials and guidance in advance of rule implementation. So, for example, we've had a lot of different venues, but OACB gathered feedback and submitted that. So they gathered the feedback through their regional representation and their leadership in the fall and provided that feedback in writing to us in early 2023. We've obviously the DODD staff, the early intervention consultants, the monitoring and data team provided in writing their feedback about what they've heard from constituents, from stakeholders for the last 4 years. What is confusing in rule? What do they tend to get a lot of questions about? What doesn't seem to match? So all of that we've taken into consideration. We then had applications for stakeholder groups because there are just so many people interested. Not everybody was able to be on the group they wanted, but largely we were able to accommodate almost everyone. So we did have stakeholder groups for the various rules, and those are not yet finished, but we're moving through. We've met on all the rule language, and we're now working through the forms. The IFSP form is the one we're still in the middle of. Most of the other forms and rules have at least drafts in process. We've met with the Early Intervention Advisory Council and stakeholder group a few months ago to look at all the rules, or 3 of the rules. We didn't get to the certification, the credential rule for service coordinators, but we will go back to them this fall. And then we will have multiple additional feedback opportunities And I encourage you to sign up for the biweekly newsletter, and we'll talk about that later. But we do have a clearance process through the department. We'll have a statewide public comment period. So you'll see all of the rules and forms. You'll have the opportunity to see them multiple times. So please look for those, register for the biweekly if you haven't already, and have the opportunity to give us feedback on those. We really appreciate that. So really, for the biggest part of the next steps is that we want to make sure that as we develop those rules and get feedback from you, we're simultaneously developing the training and the guidance. We can't do that. We can't be totally finished with that until the rules have been approved through the legislative process and your comment have all been included. But we do start thinking about that process now and what has to be changed. We'll need to make sure that that rule and guidance reflects all the changes to the rules and the forms. And we have mechanisms for communicating with all EI providers and all the disciplines. So here again are the 4 rules that we have that we're reviewing. And here is the link where you may find all the rules. We know that a lot of people who provide direct services may not actually have the opportunity to review rules themselves, and so are more in the habit of talking to their supervisor about what the rule includes. But that varies county by county and individual to individual. The rules are what govern the early intervention system, and ultimately, whenever a question is asked, we and you hopefully all go back to what does the rule say. So they're there. We encourage you to look at them.
And we will have a PDF version of the slides with the links that are clickable that can be available to you guys following the presentation. All right. Thank you, Katrina. Let's go ahead and jump right in here to the proposed changes to Rule 1002 and 1004. There'll be some very minor changes to 1001 and 1003. So today we're going to really just focus on the other 2 rules, 02 and 04 there. So as Rule 02 and the forms referenced within the rule deal with the most day-to-day activities of the field and their families, they've obviously then received the most comment and edits to date. And the first things that we are proposing to change within that rule are the definitions of assessment. So we're going to separate that definition of assessment into 2 separate definitions, one for assessment of the child and for assessment, and the other for assessment of the family. And then in tandem with the distinct definitions for the assessment of the child and family, we've also added some clarification to the process for both and how they're completed. The focus on assessment for child is on really clarifying for everyone that we need to gain information about the child's behavioral function within their daily routines and activities. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. The proposed changes to the process for completing family assessment is big in that we're proposing to remove the requirement that a department-approved tool must be used. Now, we still plan on requiring that a tool in an interview be conducted. However, there'll be some more flexibility in which the tools can be used. We're also proposing a small change here to what is currently known as Forms EIO2 and 03, which are our prior written notice and consent for evaluation, child assessment, and family assessment. Currently, those notices and consent forms are 2 separate forms, obviously. But for the sake of clarity, a more fluid process, and ease of use by our field, we're proposing to combine the 2 to create just a single form for prior written notice and acquiring consent then for those activities. When it comes to eligibility, currently there are 2 categories that a child can be eligible until age 3 if they're found eligible in them, and 2 which require that eligibility to be redetermined annually. So those 2 that require annual eligibility redetermination would be if a child's found, the team determines through their informed clinical opinion, or if their diagnosed condition they were an EI-12 was used to make them eligible for a diagnosed condition. We're proposing to eliminate the need for annual redetermination and instead have all children who are determined eligible by any of our means to be eligible until age 3. And in addition to that, with linking those diagnosed conditions, we're going to expand and clarify the list of those medical conditions that will qualify a child, and then reorganize them a little bit to be easier to read and find what condition that you think a child may or may not have as you're figuring out if they're eligible or not. So to come back to the child assessment definition, and not just definition, but then language throughout the rule whenever we're referencing child assessment, we want to focus on the importance of using that child assessment to determine functional behaviors within daily routines and activities. Now, this isn't a new concept to the field by any means, but we want to assure that our definitions align with our current practices and really emphasize the importance of understanding how each child functions within their daily routines is universally understood by everyone. When it comes to family assessment, we want to kind of make sure we're realigned with the federal definitions here. So we're proposing to clarify that definition, meaning focusing on that the resources, gaining the family's resources, priorities, and concerns is really the fundamental piece here of family assessment. And then that child behaviors and skills within their routines is captured as part of the child assessment. Now, I mean, obviously a lot of the pieces of assessment can kind of happen simultaneously, but we're hoping to really clarify what is exactly family assessment and what is really child assessment. So we also have some rules that come straight from IDEA about the sharing of information from Part C to Part B and how that everything is coordinated. So part of the expectation when it comes to those transition pieces here is that Part C shares with Part B some basic PII, personally identifiable information, to Part C, so the schools can then plan for what kind of need they may have in the next school year. Our expectation, or OSEP's expectation, is that information is shared and that parent consent is not required to share it. So currently right now, though, we are obtaining written consent to share it, even if that's not the expectation. So one element here that we're proposing is to remove the need to acquire consent to share this very basic PII, and then it'll be shared automatically with the child's school district. In tandem with doing that, we would need to add language to our parents' rights brochure that explains these expectations, the purpose why, and really rely on EISCs to understand and then explain the difference between just this very basic PII of child name, their date of birth, and their parent contact info, not more than that. That's all we would be sharing automatically, and that differs from sharing evaluation and assessment results, which would be optional, or IFSP, their diagnosis, all those other pieces. We will need consent still to share all that during the transition planning process. Another new piece here is we want to really emphasize and increase the level of screening to determine the need for autism spectrum disorder, and an evaluation by a developmental pediatrician or anyone certified to make that determination. That a new kind of more mandatory screening process being proposed would be only required for children who are determined eligible. But we're still working on the process of exactly how that will work out and what tools may be used. All right, to come back and talk about some of our forms here. We're going to highlight just some quick changes that are being proposed for them. So on our exit form, which is our EI 10, we plan on both having the rule and form edited to consolidate and streamline some exit reasons. I think now everyone in the field is familiar. It's a long list with some overlap between pieces that can be potentially confusing. So we're wanting to clarify some of that and make it a little easier to use. Now, if we think about our transition planning form here, EI07, as I just talked about, if we remove the need to provide for parents to provide consent to share that basic PII and their name, date of birth, and parent contact info, that section, which is the top half right now, will be removed, which will then allow for us to have a little more space to edit and clarify pieces of what is now the bottom half, which is our consent for our transition planning conference, or TPC. And as, again, I'm to highlight where kind of some of these changes come from. Over the last few months, we've received, I mean, even last few years, and especially last few months, we've received significant stakeholder feedback on all the forms. And we've been hosting some stakeholder groups to then provide additional targeted feedback where we are facilitating it and asking specific direct questions. And we've received a lot of rich and helpful input from all those groups. So I know probably a lot of those people are even present today. So I always want to thank them and shout out to them for all the help they're providing. All right, so some other tweaks here for our release of information form, our EI06. We currently, as it's lined up, we have a section for just kind of sharing information one way and a section for exchanging. We now want to make it so that the exchange section, which is kind of on the second page, is really highlighted here first. And we're reorganizing and shortening how consent can be applied to a single, or reorganizing and shortening the form so it's a little more clear, as well as making it so that the consent really just applies to a single person or agency rather than potentially having the ability to write in multiple agencies, which is been confusing in some instances. When it comes to our professional referral follow-up form, which is EI 14, we plan to, or are proposing to, reorganize and clarify when a parent does and does not give consent. So that's a little easier to understand. And now the rule will be a little more specific about the timelines in which the form needs to be filled out or completed. So we're proposing that within 10 calendar days after the initial IFSP is developed, or if the child is exited, whichever happens first, that within 10 days of those activities, that 14 must be sent. All right, we also are proposing some changes here to our EI 12, which is our documentation of diagnosed condition. So we're adding a place for the parent consent to the form, consent for the form to be sent to a medical professional. So an 06 won't be needed to send that 12. We can kind of expedite that process because we know every minute really is crucial during the 45-day process. As well as one of our system of payment forms, EI 16, our payment for EI services form. There'll be some small edits made to that. Hopefully that'll make it easier to use and more efficient and reduce redundancy for the field. That's been a big priority for us as we've been working on these forms, is making them easier to use and reducing redundancy for families to be easier to be understood by families, and that easy use for our field. There will be some changes to the IFSP, but that kind of stakeholder process that I talked about earlier, we're still in the midst of it. So there's still lots of drafts and changes being made. So we'll need to update you guys on all of those at a future date here. All right, so that covers most of the things here for 02. I want to jump and briefly talk to you guys here about 04. So we've received lots of feedback about service coordination and the credentialing process and the need for staffing and additional staffing and support in the field. So one of the big pieces that we wanted to address was the requirements for acquiring those service coordination credentials and hiring staff to fill those spots. So we wanted to broaden the pool of applicants for this key position. And since there really isn't a service coordination degree, a lot of the training that needs to be completed to become a great service coordinator occurs through mandated training by us, the state, as well as the key supervision and mentoring pieces within the locality accounting. We've also had a lot of conversations about what characteristics of a high quality service coordinator are needed and where do they really come from. And that those are really related to qualities kind of outside just what degree you have. So we wanted to take that into consideration as we were tweaking this rule. So because of all that, we decided, or we're proposing here, to remove most of the degree work experience requirements for service coordinator positions. So under the new rule right now, we're proposing that just holding an associate's degree or at least 60 college credit hours, equivalent to 2 years of college experience and credits, that be put into place, and that we then make sure that our foundational training requirements are met during the first year of hiring, their first year working there, rather than counting on them to have some sort of experience beforehand and then having a year or two to conduct those trainings. We're trying to prioritize those. So that would mean that modules 1 through 5 of Principles of Service Coordination, or POSC, need to then be completed during the first year of our 1-year credential for both service coordinators and service coordinator supervisors. And that would be needed to even renew your 1 year. If you were able to complete all the modules, you'd be able to apply for a 5-year, which is how the rule is currently written as well. So we're hoping that all that can help address some of the needs in the area. All right, I'm gonna pass it back to Katrina here to finish up.
So the rule process, and we have a lot of time. We've moved through that much more quickly than I even thought we could. So that's great. And we had a little extra time at the beginning. So go ahead and before I start into this slide, please start. I've seen a couple questions, but not many. So please put any kind of questions you have about the process or about what we've covered here, which I know has been very fast. We can always go back and look at some of these slides. We can also pull up a rule if you need us to, or also the other thing to do is type in anything that over the last few years with this rule implementation, either for rule or form, you have found confusing or problematic or don't understand, or and that will give us some additional opportunity and feedback that we can consider as we move through this process. So the next steps, as we finish, just to kind of let you know where we are, we're going to meet with our stakeholder group to review the drafts to the form. So first we went through the rule process. The rules reference the forms. So we need to make sure that the rule language and the form language mesh. So we're going back to our stakeholder groups to look at those draft forms before we polish them and get them ready for wide distribution. We are also still in the midst, as Henry said, with the IFSP. So we have a small stakeholder group that are assisting with development of the draft IFSP, and then we also will take that back to the fuller stakeholder group that worked on that Rule 02, the eligibility and services rule that has all the requirements for IFSP in it. So we will still do that. Then we will go back to advisory council. As I said, they are our advisory body for early intervention. So we will be meeting with them to share what we were unable to share, we're ready for at the last meeting. And they meet quarterly. We will then, DODD has a process that they call clearance. So we have a group of stakeholders that DODD always sends all rules to get feedback, and how long those rules are out and available for feedback depends on how many rules there are, how complex the changes are, etc. So those go out to the prescribed list, and it includes county board, superintendent listserv, the OACB listserv, disability rights, I believe, really diverse, because they get all of DODD rules. But at that same time, when they go out for that clearance period, we will also in early intervention make sure those go out to the advisory council and the EI field. So some people will get them multiple ways because they're in multiple listservs, but we will make sure that you get that addressed and have an opportunity to see them. So that clearance process is an early step in it's not really called public comment. Public comment for the federal regs require a certain process that we follow. But following that clearance period, then we will have that OSEP required public comment period. So that will be in the winter, late 2023, early 24. And then all of that, when, again, with Becky Phillips, our rule guru, at the department, she takes all of the comments that come in, works with the EI staff to answer every single question or comment that comes in. And we consider every question and comment that comes in, and either decide to make a change based on that comment or give a reason why we're not making a change based on that comment. So we do often get suggestions like, let's extend the 45-day timeline for evaluation, assessment, and IFSP development. And we always say kind of the same thing, that is a federal requirement and it cannot be extended. But for a lot of things, there can be a tweak. People notice typos. People notice language is just not clear. We can also have one person say, this language is perfect, I love it. And a second person say, I can't follow this sentence at all. So we have to kind of figure out how we address that difference in response to rule language and form language. So anyway, we'll do all of that over those winter months. And then what we have to do to file rules with JCAR. And if you're not familiar, I know the OACB, our friends at OACB are very familiar with JCAR, but it stands for the Joint Committee on Agency Rule Review. And they are a committee that consists of 5 state representatives. You can go online and look at their website and find out all about them. They have 5 state representatives and 5 state senators, and they review proposed new, amended, and rescinded rules from all the state agencies. And basically, they look at making sure this rule does not exceed the scope of the agency's statutory authority. So in this case, DODD has the authority to write rule as a lead agency for early intervention. And so we try to make sure that our rules align with the federal law almost exactly, which can be exasperating, we realize, because the rule language, the federal language can be confusing. arcane, difficult to follow, and often we don't have any choice. The system of payments rule is a great example of language that is very complex and sometimes doesn't even make any sense. And we've asked the federal regs, the feds, the personnel at the federal, at OSEP, if we can change them to make them match what Ohio's process is. And we've been told, no, you have to have this language that's in the federal regs exactly in your rules. So we recognize the craziness that you deal with, because we deal with it as well. But we will try to be as open and transparent and explain as well as we can. Any question that anybody has, we will try to address it as well as we can. So we have to write a business impact statement, how the rule changes impact the public business. Not all of you are a business, but we do address those in the business impact statement, and we do it every single time we write a rule. Then we develop that training and guidance, and we try to have that ready well in advance. So in spring of 2024, we hope to have the rule approved through JCAR by late winter, early spring. So it's approved, and then, but with an implementation date of July 1st. So just because they approve it, let's say in March, does not mean it starts in March. It will have an implementation date, and that we plan on that being July 1st, 2024, when it's due. So that's those 4 rules we talked about. And you will also see here the sign up for the biweekly and how you sign up for that. We can put that information in the chat, and make sure you all can get that and sign up if you're not already signed up. So that it concludes the overarching piece of this. I do want to say that you'll see at the very beginning of the slide, you may have noticed that it's still a DODD, Department of Developmental Disability presentation. We all still, each agency personnel that work at, that will be moving into the Department of Children and Youth are still housed and paid and supervised within our own departments. But that transition is happening and we are moving. We're still writing the rules as the governing agency now is DODD, but there will probably be a process, and I don't know quite what it is, but there are processes in place for how to transition language to open a rule and just change DODD to Department of Children and Youth. So there are processes for that. We anticipate being able to do that, and that process will hopefully be very smooth. But the rules, because of the federal language, kind of doesn't matter who the lead agency is. They have to mostly all be the same. So on the next slide, you will see our email addresses. We all have transitioned to, we all have new email addresses, Children and Youth instead of DODD. So please note that. But if you send it to our old email addresses, they've created a way to make sure all of that gets transferred, and we all are receiving all our emails. So I think that that's a very quick overview of what we're doing, what we're proposing to change. And I see there have been questions coming in. I'll start with the first one that I saw come in from Alicia, I think, who asked, and then maybe Henry would like to answer the next one. So we'll just start going through the chat and question and answers, or maybe I can read one and Henry can read one and we'll figure out who answers it. But there was a question about, will we still need to do redeterminations? So with the proposed change to eligibility for all children now being eligible till their 3rd birthday, there is no need to redetermine eligibility annually. You still will annually do a child assessment and annually family assess. So both of those two activities to determine strengths and needs, family resources, priorities, and concerns are done on an annual basis, and that development of the IFSP outcomes. And when there is no need for an outcome, there's no need to continue in EI, but that's different from eligibility. So eligibility is determined, and the child may leave and come back. Their eligibility is still there, but now their need for services, or we don't really use that language anymore, but they have some kind of IFSP need, which is obviously a need for an early intervention service. So that can be established by the team, and that assessment process updated. So there is still annual assessment of both the child and family. Henry, do you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Is that the eligibility, we won't need to use an evaluation, like, she's saying, to redetermine eligibility in these pieces. I think it'll be a smoother, easier process for everyone. I also saw some questions in here up the top here about EIO6. The goal is to make it, as close to one page, if not one page, in its entirety. I think obviously we're still in the draft form of this, but that is a target to do, is to simplify that process so it isn't really two separate sections. It is one, flowy process that ends with the signature. One signature, one spot for signatures at the bottom. It'll make
the other thing we've done is reworked that form to what we heard from stakeholders was that the exchange kind of needed to happen first, because that was kind of what you locally found was kind of the default, that most families were happy for it to be shared either way. The reality of it is that a hospital, a clinic, a school, whoever may or may not be able to exchange without their own form. In fact, I'd be surprised if they can. But we do hear from you that you've worked out something or other, and your local partner does accept our early intervention, and they'll then release records to you just with that. That's on them and not our place to say anything about one way or another. Our release of information covers us and our federal and state requirements. So we have it looks different. It looks really different from what you've seen before in the proposed form. We have taken that stakeholder feedback to try to switch it so there's less repetition, and it does seem to flow better to us. It will only be eligible for the use of one agency. So you can't have multiple agencies. The requirement under the procedural safeguards for families is that families give consent for release of records, that they know exactly who it's going to and for what purpose. So this kind of generic multiple agencies on one form, it will be for a single agency per form. So that will be different. What's next, Henry?
There's a question in about the DS rule and certification, and if that will be addressed with the July 1, 2024 rules changes.
So the DS certification, no, it's not up for review. Yeah.
It's on a different
easy
timeline. It was more because it was more recently implemented. It's it's on a different 5-year cycle. So that won't be addressed this time, but any needed clarifications or things will be addressed when that rule comes up. Also have a question in here about the EI 14, why it is like the goal of the EI 14 and what changes we're making to that, if we could clarify on that. Do you want me to go back to those slides, Katrina, or?
Let's see, why EI 14 is needed. So Lauren, if you would type So EI, which one?
That's
I'm
sharing back with referral sources,
oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay.
the follow-up.
So what we're trying to do, there is a requirement in our rule that there is a professional referral follow-up. That is required, and it has been and still will be, or we're not proposing to change that. What we were trying to clarify is there are different ways in which one provides follow-up. So we hear from our stakeholders, and that's a pretty diverse group, including medical professionals, that they are not getting relevant and or timely response from EI to whom they referred. So we want to be responsive and continue to encourage and build relationships between early intervention and the family's medical home, or homes. For many families have complex situations, that's multiple places. So what we've tried to do in the form is clarify that for certain things, you can send the form back with no more information other than we haven't been able to reach the parent, or the parent has not given me permission to share anything else with you. So that form goes back to the referral source with nothing. Either you couldn't reach the family, or the family doesn't want any information to go back. And then the bottom half of the form will be specified for particular timelines for when so if we don't want it just sent, yes, the child's in EI. We want it sent that you've either exited the child, or you've evaluated, assessed, and or started an IFSP, or you've evaluated and they're not eligible. So it actually matches something relevant within the EI system. They're in EI, they're going to get some services because we found them eligible and we developed an IFSP, which then would prompt the sending of the IFSP if the family has agreed to that, which is a different process. So we have the requirement for professional follow-up is there. We've tried to make the process and clarity on the form more and in the rule better. So we'll see, please provide us feedback when you see that form and rule together, and let us know if you think we've achieved that or not.
Yeah, certainly. All right. We also have some questions here about child assessment and how the service coordinator participates in that in reference to how, changes to our definitions, or not changes, but clarification on our definitions of child assessment in the FDA tool. I think I can speak to this a little bit here of, if tool still is conducted, say the RBI is conducted, and you gain family assessment information on the priorities, concerns, and resources there, and say a service coordinator conducts that. That's still allowable, even if elements of that are you gain through the RBI are still child assessment. Our evaluators and assessors are certainly going to need to review all that information and ask clarifying questions if they have additional piece of information they need. All that information, we're working as a team here to acquire all this information. It will need to certainly be reviewed and analyzed by the evaluators and assessors. All of it will need to be.
And following up with that, we will be providing guidance on that process, because we know that what we've done, what we're doing now is with what we call the family directed assessment. We've incorporated the process of what is child assessment and what is family assessment into one activity. And when you look at, for those of you who use Robin McWilliams' routines-based interview and routines-based intervention approach and model, it isn't a child assessment and a family or a family assessment. It's both of those blended together. What we do have to be really careful and concerned about, and in some communities, we have lots of families refusing the family-directed assessment. They can, the family assessment is optional, and that's the families telling us what their resources, priorities, and concerns are. The child information about behavior and skills within natural environments and within daily routines is not optional. And yet all of that has been then not captured because the family did not give consent. So we will be cleaning that up and making that clear. And then and then I think it's another question later on we'll come to, but I think that question of whether then it's a required tool. So you still have to get at your assessment. We've not required an assessment tool. You'll still have to get at daily routines and activities. You'll have to understand what the family perceives as their child's skills within those daily routines. And that's child assessment information, not family assessment, because family assessment is priorities and concerns. So we're going to develop materials to help articulate that, help you articulate it, help you understand it, and help you practice it. The tools that you use, if you use the RBI or some version of it now, you will still be able to use it. What parents can decline when they decline the family assessment will be clear about what parts can be declined and what can't. That's what so we don't expect you to have to change your tools or your practices very much at all, but your understanding of what parts have to be done to meet the requirements of family assessment and child assessment will change, we suspect.
Exactly.
What's next? So there is a question, it looks like, about the tools, which I'll kind of expand a little bit more on. The two eligibility tools are meant to, norm referenced, meant to establish eligibility, and we will still use those. Those eligibility requirements are still there. They're not needed now or in the future for children with diagnosed conditions who are eligible based on a diagnosed condition. So we still expect, based on that training we developed and provided this last year or so, for people to go through that process of first determining whether there's a diagnosed condition, doing an evaluation when there is no condition or no suspected condition, and then using the Battelle or the Bailey for the eligibility determination process when an evaluation is conducted. That's still required. They're still very important tools. They don't get at the child's functioning within daily routines very much. There's a lot that can be inferred or that one can see through, but the evaluation is not the use of the tool. The evaluation is observation, use of a tool, interview, and identifying vision, hearing issues. It's very complex, and we do the shorthand of the tool is what makes you eligible, but it's way more. The process of evaluation is much more complicated than that. We've also been working on that evaluation part of the IFSP to make more clear about all those requirements, or frame it in a different way, since that's been something we've been asked. So we do still expect those eligibility tools to be used. We expect what we've been asking for through the FDA process currently to be captured as the child assessment and be utilized by the evaluation and assessment team to develop their assessment report on the child's function. Somebody asked about the list of changes to the rule. You have to wait just because it's not ready. I mean, it's in development, but you will be able to see all of that.
Yep, all those steps that Katrina walked through with JCAR and things, there will be plenty of opportunity to see all that as they move through the process. I also see a question here about, use of in-person or virtual meetings, or IFSP updates and things. Our rule will follow the federal rule on that. That's a federally determined thing. There's still at this point, as a remnant from COVID, OSEP, our federal rulemakers here, have not, they inserted a piece there where these meetings could be done, IFSP meetings could be done virtually. They are yet to rescind that. As long as they've not rescinded that, they'll be allowable. But our rule will follow whatever they determine there.
So issuing certifications and stuff, we think that will be Department of Children and Youth for daycare license, childcare license, DS, service coordinator, the DS. So just, it may be interesting for some of you to know that the DS certification, a long time ago, back once upon a time in fairy tale land, when Part C was still Part H of IDEA, and states were being asked to voluntarily agree to early intervention as it was stated under IDEA. And ODH became the lead agency. DODD very early on, before it was even DODD, it was still MRDD back then, picked up and developed a certification rule for DSs. So what we had in Ohio, we had physical and occupational and speech therapists and counselors. We did not have anyone for early intervention who provided what in the federal regs is allowed as special instruction. So education had people that were 3 and up, but their licensor really didn't address the birth to 3 piece. And so a long time ago, and I'd have to look back, it was in the 80s, maybe even before that, DODD wrote the rule for the DS certification. And it was called the EI specialist, I think, back then. And we have continued that. That's where it's been housed, because ODH gave money to DODD to implement certain parts of EI at the state level, not at the local level, but at the state level. And then we had 3 EI consultants, and we had a period even before that where DODD funded DSs, would reimburse them for the courses they took in order to get certified as we were building up that system. So it's been at DODD because of our relationship with the lead agency at ODH back at the time. There's no reason that the agency that holds EI wouldn't continue to develop the certification for that person. In fact, I think the feds would suggest that would be the way one would do it. But obviously it can be done through interagency agreements. It could go to some other agency. It could stay at DODD through some interagency agreement, but I'm guessing it would move to DC, Department of Children and Youth. Okay, I'll let that go and move forward.
See a question here about the use of EI08 and EI14. So EI08 is a form that's almost entirely handled by central intake. So that's our form of referring to Part B if a child's referred to us within 45 days of their their 3rd birthday. That form will continue to primarily be used by central intake, and will we're proposing kind of removing it from the form packet that local service coordinators use. As for EI14, I think Katie Parker put in the chat here that it is required to be sent to all professional referrals, and that is the case. And then the aspects that Katrina touched on earlier of we're clarifying, or proposing to make some slight changes to the form to make it easier to be understood and conducted, and then sent out it within a more timely fashion to our referral sources. Katrina, there's a question in here about service coordinator supervisor requirements, and if there'll be an adjustment to those, like we are adjusting the service coordinator requirements.
So say that one again. Tell me that one again. So if we're adjusting, for the, yes. So
the
I think the
supervisors.
primary, we're not changing. What we heard from stakeholders was that the requirements to have at least a bachelor's degree and in a related field for supervisors was not a problem. So at this point, we haven't changed it. We're certainly open to feedback on that. That role needed a different level, and the service coordination in particular was a training within the field kind of job, and therefore the trainings that were developed, the degree did not matter. The way personality, individual learning styles, in communication styles mattered way more than degree. So we haven't changed that. We have required the supervisors to get the principles of service coordination modules 1 through 5 within the first year, and have completed everything before they've get a 5-year, but we haven't changed anything else there. So please do provide feedback.
Yep, there still will be minimum degree requirements on the supervisor side.
I do also see that there's a question about EIO7 and concern with families that don't want their information shared, including, say, the Amish or Mennonite who do not use government programs. So it's really what we're going to do also is prepare some scripts for service coordinators to use with families to make sure, because they certainly need to know their right and what is shared and what the purpose is. So that basic PII that the feds say must be shared, because this is all under IDEA. And I'm assuming you want your Amish, Mennonite, the people that don't want to use federal funds. This is a federally funded program, and they need to understand that when they start with EI, no matter who they are. And that sharing of what that information is, that it's your name, your contact, your child's name, no diagnosis information, no other than they're eligible for EI, which does not make them eligible for Part B. But both of these programs are both under IDEA, under the Disabilities with Education Act. And that sharing of information is only so schools can plan for the number of units and teachers and things they need for preschool special ed. And even still, that doesn't mean anything. So that also that awareness that we're not going to share an IFSP, we're not going to share diagnostic information, we're not going to share any of that. That only happens when we get ready to move into that, somewhere between 2 years, 3 months, and 2 years, 12 months, 3 years before, or 90 days before we do that, start that transition process. So we're not going to share any other information. But you'll note, as Henry's points out when he does this, that in the procedural safeguard parent rights brochure, there are places where that information is already shared. So making sure as a service coordinator and as any other provider that you're aware of those places that information is shared, and making sure those families who may not want it shared, if you're already aware of that, you'll want to point that out to them. So what else, Henry?
I think there's kind of some follow-up to any changes to who's qualified personnel, and how that works with evaluation assessment. There not be significant changes to anything there. I think if a service coordinator is not currently considered qualified personnel, that won't change. You'll still need, a multidisciplinary team of someone who is dual disciplined or 2 separate disciplines under that. We will talk through and suss out kind of exactly how that assessment process works and looks, and who needs to review or conduct what information. Our 2 multidisciplinary qualified personnel are still going to be responsible for conducting evaluation and assessment. But as we're working through this and rolling these pieces out, we will provide lots more guidance and insight into, the proper way for those things to be conducted. We are not anticipating, any big changes to how you guys are conducting those activities needed to be done. For initials, we'll just be kind of looking through it through a slightly different lens that'll align more with the be clear with the federal definitions, and it'll work out, I promise.
Yeah.
All right, let's see.
Somebody asked about a screening for autism.
Mhm.
We don't know yet. We're certainly working with Ocali and the autism community. I think Diane is engaged with that at work. The MChat, we've got a list of possibilities. So, and we don't have written in the draft rule yet that it will be a service coordinator who does those screenings. It's offering it, and the local community, local EI system having a way to make sure the screening gets conducted for eligible children. At some point, we've got some draft language in there about, no more than 9 months before their 3rd birthday, or no less than 9 months. I can't remember exactly what it is, but that's still being drafted, and that's part of the reason we don't have that rule to share with you yet. But we will have that language in the draft rule when we get it out to you.
There's some questions here about, in 09 or the IFSP needing boxes to expand or whatnot. We are planning to have those documents be expandable, eliminate the use of an overflow page or things like that in those instances. So, all of your text and narrative that you're writing will flow in one spot consecutively.
So somebody asked about DS qualified to administer the diagnostic screening. So it isn't a diagnostic screening. That is not at all what we're suggesting. We're just suggesting a screening for need for referral for an evaluation to determine whether the child has that diagnosis. So it will not be at all making a diagnosis on our end in the EI system, and that process of making sure the family has that information. So, but anyone can do that in chat. Whatever tool we have, we'll let the locals decide. The tool will mandate to some degree who's qualified to administer that screening, but we will have all of that later as we determine what tools we will allow.
Yep. So a question in here about eligibility till 3 and ICO, if that's still going to be an option. Yes, ICO is still an option for determining eligibility. That will not change. And if a child is determined eligible via ICO, that we're proposing they'll be eligible until age 3. Now, to hit on another question here about mention of need aspect here, if a child is initially a child's eligible, we're then proceeding towards developing an IFSP, as long as the family is still interested in proceeding, and that they'll then be eligible until 3 to continue to receive services until the family is no longer interested, or further down the road, we've met all of our outcomes, and the family doesn't see a need for anything else. The team agrees there is a need for anything else. Then a child can be exited, but the child will still be eligible even if they're exited for those aspects if they, want to come back or additional concerns come up, pieces like that.
So there's a question about EI 11 and what we will do to make that clear.
Yeah, so I can join our plans.
Please.
Katrina, did you want to?
Oh, go ahead, please.
So right now, EI 11 is our prior written notice to propose change. And then whenever there's at an initial or an annual or a periodic, if there's a change to kind of the first 7 columns on the grid there in EI 11 needs to be completed, as well as if changes need to occur to our services outside of an IFSP meeting. We are going to propose to take the aspect of any changes that are being done during an IFSP meeting to that prior written notice will live within the IFSP. So the EI 11 will therefore only be needed for changes to the IFSP proposed outside of an IFSP meeting. I think that'll be a lot clearer for you guys, help out and reduce the need for that EI 11 to be used significantly, because it'll be built into our IFSP.
There are at least a couple things about that process during the transition time, during that 2 years, 3 months up until the 3rd birthday, and when reassessments have to be done and when they don't have to be redone. And we have reworked, probably the transition section of the rule has been reworked more than any other section to address when assessments don't have to be done again, when it's too close to the 3rd birthday and that's not needed. When it is required, again, we only requiring in our rule what's required in the federal law in that transition area. So we have tried to clean that up. So for those of you who are asking questions about that process, do take a look. So again, it's a very complicated, and for those of you trying to understand even our rule, the federal regs have transitioned in multiple places, and it's a very cumbersome process. So, but the parent rights piece, the notification of the LEA, the expectation from the feds that be shared because it is one system. And for those of you anxious about that, I mean, what we found is that it's really a lot in the way it's presented, and we want to be very forthright and honest with families about what EI is and what it is not. And we've gotten better over the years about being able to articulate that. So we hope to continue to engage families in ways that they know exactly what they're getting and what it is. So Henry, there's one here that might be helpful, a discussion about combining the evaluation summary and the cause on the IFSP.
Yeah. We are still in the process of developing drafts of a new IFSP form, but one of our major goals is to reduce redundancy within the IFSP and have all the rich information that you guys have collected to be really targeted to be within that child assessment summary pieces within our cause sections, and to not have you feel like you need to explain details that you observed within the evaluation summary and then yet again in the cause. That is a primary goal of ours, and we're planning on having that process become smoother and easier for everyone.
Get more questions about the professional referral follow-up. Why can we send it back saying that we haven't been able to reach the family? That is because they made the referral. So the child's name and the parent information is in their system already. We can't send them randomly to anybody. It's only to the person who made that referral to EI. So if it's a self-refer, or if the grandparent referred, we don't do a professional referral follow-ups, and we don't send it to all the parents or the child's medical personnel. It's only to the professional referral follow-up. And there's a question related to that. Since we've been working remotely and we get emails from the professionals referring children on a consistent basis, can we email them form EI 14? I don't think we have any limitations on how that form is sent back to them. I think that can be emailed. So there may be a local process, or you may have received an answer from a consultant so feel free to go back to your consultant if you think you've had a different message than that. But I don't believe we have any restrictions that I know of on how that's shared. questions about EIDS and that changing. I know that Taylor, Nathan, and the data team work really hard to work with DODD's IT people, and I know that's a constant worry and headache to make everything match. I will take your question back to them, but I'm sure Taylor already is aware of any places that are difficult or don't work well. We hope that we do understand that the data system stays where it is until the new method of having the data system move to a new department in order to eliminate, because we are teeny tiny. Imagine JFS, childcare licensing, or something like that. But we will work on those, and we'll keep trying to address those. So if there are particular places that you believe that EIDS and our rule and our requirements through rule don't mesh, please let us know as part of that rule comment period. We do want to hear all of that.
Definitely. There's questions about EIO6 and will it need to be completed for each entity that we're going to exchange information with. So EIO6 is our release of information. Yeah, to be more in line with how releases are universally done, and to protect, families' information. It's the information on who we share information with can be protected too. So yes, there will be a change there that a unique EIO6 will need to be completed with each entity that you are sharing information with. We can, we'll work out and talk through the exact details of that and where the lines are on it coming up, but there will be a switch there to change that. And it's really to protect the families more and to fall in line with how releases of information are conducted pretty universally.
I think we need to turn it back over to Erica. There have been a lot of fabulous questions. I knew there would be more about specifics, and you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg on the changes. There are some little changes. We highlighted ones we thought would concern you, interest you, worry you, or that you'd have questions about, but do pay attention to all the detail when you get those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina and Henry. That was wonderful information. Like Katrina had said, there will be lots of upcoming webinars regarding some of these updates. Also, we had put in the chat the link to the Padlet with this information and materials, and it will also be available in Member Connect. We will now take a short break for 15 minutes or so, and then I hope to see you all on the next session at 10:45.